Hey, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Biometrics Leadership Lab. We are here to support you on your biometrics journey, giving you tools and knowledge to help you grow from lead to leader. Our topic today is what is a lead? The episode is proudly sponsored by Bioforum, the Data Masters. Thank you for joining us live. If you are watching a replay, thank you for taking the time to catch up. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself and our panelists. I am Amanda Cross, a professional coach and founder of Crossfield Coaching and Consulting, an executive biometrics consultant agency dedicated to helping small to mid-sized companies and teams deliver biometrics in a better way. With decades of experience in clinical research, from a statistician to a chief operating officer, I'm currently leveraging my cross-functional experience to help teams integrate, communicate, and collaborate to improve their service delivery, as well as helping functional leaders professionally develop themselves and their teams. I also support creating and refining biometrics messaging, positioning, and presentation in the marketplace. With me today, I have Audrey Erasmus representing data management. Audrey is currently Senior Director of the Project Management Office at Bioforum. She brings over a decade of experience in clinical data management with a focus on program and project management. In her current role, she oversees the project management function, leading a team committed to high-quality, on-time deliverables. She is responsible for supporting collaboration and communication across functions and stakeholders to achieve project milestones. We have Bobby Ratchford representing biostatistics. Bobby is a biostatistician with 15 years in the life science industry and a master's degree from Washington University. He's worked for both CRO and sponsor companies, most recently with ProPharma, growing their biostatistics and statistical programming teams to over 30 members globally. Bobby has extensive experience across the design, analysis, and reporting of clinical trial data, and has worked with multiple regulatory agencies. This year, he founded Better Biostatistics, a consulting and education-focused firm. His mission is to improve the overall quality of life science research through better biostatistics. And thankfully for the last, we have Evgeny Starotsyn here representing statistical programming. Evgeny is currently a director of biostatistical programming at Premier Research. During his career, he's held various roles in statistical programming and worked for small, mid-sized, and large CROs. He has vast experience in process improvement, department management, and people management, and focuses on process alignment and collaboration between biometric groups and departments. So thank you all again for being here today. And we are going to jump right in with the first question. How do you define the role of a functional lead at a CRO? And what do you think are their primary responsibilities?
Okay, so I'll kick us off from a data management perspective, if that's okay, and then we can hear the different definitions from the other functions. So from a data management perspective, your data management lead is basically responsible for everything data management related. So all the data management activities within the clinical trial and having oversight on that. The lead support, but it's definitely not limited to, but mostly the design of the CRF for the database, ensuring the data quality and data integrity, the data management activities after that, going over into the data review cycles, integrations, reconciliations, and then also the leads are, of course, responsible for providing status updates to the sponsors and all the functional stakeholders that is participating in the trial, and then collaborating with the other functional leads that's also working on the study.
And that's a great segue. Evgeny, would you mind going for statistical programming? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So the simple answer to this question for lead statistical programmer is the person responsible for oversight of all statistical programming activities and statistical programming deliveries, which include data sets and other technical components for regulatory submissions like Define XML and other things, and also statistical tables, figures, and listings for statistical analysis. So that's a classic answer. You can find it in many of the SOPs in our industry. In a broader sense, statistical programming are kind of building a bridge between data and the statistical analysis results, between data and the analysis. And in this sense, statistical programming also have responsibilities in database design and also statistical analysis, and should have abilities, knowledges, and skills in those areas as well.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I am getting some feedback, so I wonder if we mute our microphones while we're not speaking. I think that might help us a little bit. But I love that both of you spoke on the bridge between the data and the statistician, or the collaboration between the other functions. I think that that is a crucial piece to a lead. And so I'll speak a little bit more on what it means to be a lead statistician. And I kind of a fair warning here, my response is probably going to be biased, which is hilarious because the statistician is supposed to remove bias from analyses, right? But from my vantage point, in my career as a biostatistician, really I see the lead statistician as the CEO, the owner of the end result of the clinical trial. Right? We conduct these clinical trials, which are these huge songs and dances, all so that we can collect very valuable data. But the data itself is not valuable unless it's analyzed and interpreted correctly. And that is the responsibility of the statistician. Specifically, the lead statistician is the one who holds that responsibility. They are ultimately accountable for the end results of the clinical trial. And so everything they do during the clinical trial, they have to have that in mind of what is the final result here? What p-values are we trying to generate? What confidence intervals do we need to generate? What overall reports does the regulatory authority need to see in order to show that this new drug, product, device, whatever it is safe and effective and can be approved for use by the broader population? Now, the question is a functional lead in a CRO. So there's two real kind of sides to our industry, right? There's the sponsor side, which is the companies that are the ones producing the products. They're the ones who are manufacturing the drugs. And then there's the CRO, the contract research organization. If you are a lead statistician on the CRO side, you have an added responsibility. Not only are you responsible for the end results of the clinical trial, but you are also responsible for maintaining good client relationship and communication, so you understand what the sponsor is trying to achieve, when they're trying to achieve it. You are the link, the go-between between the sponsor and their clinical trial. You have to make sure that you're updating them regularly. And the key to that, as Audrey and Evgeny both very accurately pointed out, is collaboration between all of the functions, not even just data management and statistical programming, but project management and clinical operations, making sure the whole song and dance goes smoothly. So the lead, huge role, huge responsibility, especially on the CRO side.
Yeah, and I thank you for bringing that up. So obviously, if you got the bias joke that Bobby made, you are a statistician. If and I think I also show my bias because having started as a statistician, I always view that role as the overall responsible party, because I found most sponsors look to the statistician to have all the answers. And so a good lead is going to make sure they are getting the right information from the other leads and presenting them as a unified team, which is going to go into my next question here, which is what qualities make an exceptional lead in your functions? What specific skills and behaviors do high-performing leads consistently demonstrate? And I just want to jump in here because when I worked with Evgeny, we were doing an exercise on defining a lead, and I found it very funny because we thought that they were basically a perfect human being who knew everything at all times and was able to do everything and speak well and never miss a communication. And that sounds really great in theory, and we all know that that's not the characteristics of a human. So let's hear what you guys think about what makes a great lead.
I think for statistical programming, at least, technical skills go without saying, right? But for the functional lead, for the lead statistical programmer, I think that they should not necessarily be the strongest programmers. They should not necessarily be the guru at, let's say, statistics standards. So what is most important is our communicational skills and other soft skills. So they need to be stress resistant. They need to maintain, keep being efficient, working under stress, under changing environments, under changing requirements. So I don't really know what exceptional lead is, but the strong lead really needs to have a good experience and have very strong soft skill.
So I can definitely agree with Evgeny there. Yeah, I think across the functions, having good communication skills is critical for a good lead, because from a data management perspective, you need to be able to communicate to all the functional leads everything that relates to data management. But you also have an internal team, so you might not necessarily need the strong technical skills that is needed to build a database, but you need to be able to bring the team together to meet the timelines of a database build. So having that strong communication skill set is really important. The one thing that is constant in the industry that we work in is change. So I have found that the stronger leads are more adaptable to changes. We know how it goes. On a study, you work really hard, you design the perfect database, you have your first patient in, and then the amendment comes, right? So, and having the ability to deal with the changes that comes with this environment, but also the changes on studies, maybe changes in your company, is important, because it can really inhibit the way that you function every day. And then, of course, this is a high-paced environment. It's sometimes you have 3 studies with all their deliverables at the same time. You need to be able to manage your time, work under that stressful environment, and do it well. I think from a lead perspective, that would be the qualities that I think is important. So, Bobby?
I got to stop going last year. You guys are crushing it. Those, all 3 of you, phenomenal. I completely agree. Communication, number one, be able to handle stress and multiple tasks at one time. Audrey, brilliant. I think the one thing that I can add that hasn't been said yet is an exceptional lead to me is someone who knows the entire process flow. They can think ahead and say, okay, today I'm working on this data transfer agreement. But this data transfer agreement is going to have impact on my statistical programming team in a couple of weeks when we start doing CDISC standards. So let me make sure that we're mapping these questionnaire data correctly in this data transfer agreement, for example. And being able to foresee or even project what issues might arise, and then use clear communication and stress management techniques to handle those situations earlier versus later, really makes an exceptional lead for me. Someone who can predict issues and then work early to prevent them from actually occurring. That's a good thing.
Something that I think that I want to add, that's not necessarily related to your study outcomes, but in this industry, as a lead, you work with a global team. So it's important for leads to have good cultural awareness. Understand like where your teams are located, how they work, because that really helps. If you have that understanding and you can bring your team together as a lead, you have the right recipe to deliver successful outcomes.
Okay, I'm going to flip to the next question now. I just also want to highlight something that Bobby was saying, which is it's the ability to know what will be impacted by something you're working on today. And if you don't know what something is going to impact, you should ask, right? Because I think we've all worked in places where a statistician didn't, or a statistical programmer didn't review a data transfer agreement, and the third party data ended up having problems that made it programmatically challenging or impacted the statistical analysis. So it's always important to think, what am I working on? Who's it going to impact? And gee, I wonder if I should get their input. And a line manager is always going to be willing to help you navigate that if you don't know. So always ask. Okay, the next question is, what are some common mistakes or pitfalls you have seen your leads make, and how can they be avoided?
I can go first here. So you guys, so I get a good shake at
Go
it. Yeah. So especially on the CRO side. So again, there's the two groups, the sponsor and the CRO. I think today we're primarily speaking about what it's like to be a lead on the CRO side. I think a lot of times there's difficulty for the lead in terms of balancing what truly needs to be communicated to the sponsor versus what can be handled internally and then presented to the sponsor. So I think a lot of times a pitfall that I see some leads make is to present a problem to the sponsor without coming with a solution, at least a potential solution attached to that problem. Like, hey, sponsor, we have this database go live. It's occurred and we're receiving these variables now, and it's not going to work out the way we thought in terms of the primary analysis. Stopping there is pretty bad. You definitely don't want to do that. You want to say, but we have solutions A, B, and C. Which of these would you like to pursue? The risk associated with each is X, Y, and Z. So always having a lead always come with identified problems is a good thing, but they have to, if and only if, they come with proposed solutions. So a very common pitfall is, I've identified this problem and I'm going to the sponsor too early. Work internally. You don't have to rush. Make sure that you have all of the options identified and the risks associated with those options, and then presenting that forward. That's a big role of the lead to communicate with the sponsor. And unfortunately, it's a very common area for pitfalls. We'd love to hear from Evgeny on what statistical programmers might be facing.
Oh, we face a lot of pitfalls. The one I can think of, which I've seen a lot, especially with the new leads, as they say, if you want to get things done well, do it yourself. So I think this is a very common pitfall for the lead programmers and for the functional leads in general who have an extensive team. So the lead needs to learn to delegate. And this is not as easy as it may sound, because it's really painful, to change this mindset, because we're all humans and it's about control, right? It's about keeping control, and we're not comfortable when we lose this control. So, but when people finally can deal with this, when they can change this mindset, it's not long before they see the benefits of this approach, and it will make their lives be easier.
So I'm going to add to that, because what I've seen leads do is, because we want to do it ourselves, when we do delegate, we micromanage. And that is also a pitfall that we do. So that really demotivates the team that you're working with. On the DM side, there's a lot of other functional groups that the lead works with. So you have the database designers, you might have a validation team, you might have a coding team, you have data reviewers. So there's a lot of different subset of teams that the lead works with. And it's important to have that team set the expectations for them, but not micromanage them, because that can really demotivate the team and have the opposite effect of what you've wanted to achieve. My project management side is, of course, going to say not managing the risks well, or not communicating it well. Each of the functional aspects have different areas of risk that is important. And I think what is sometimes also lacking is that as the leads, we do not look at how the risks impact each other. So when we do work cross-functionally, do not remember to look at the risks of each function, but also if there's a risk in data entry being delayed, what does that look like for the statistician? What does that look like for the statistical programming team? So when you do your risk management, don't focus only on your functional area, but think about the holistic approach for the broader team. And then all of this, like we've all said, comes back to if you don't have good communication, frequent status updates with your entire team, that really is the recipe for not meeting your study outcomes.
Completely agreed. And if you don't mind, I'd love to add one thing, because that really triggered a thought in my mind about the clear communication. And this is primarily on the statistics side again, but I would say one of the most critical components to being a lead in the CRO setting is to manage the project budget in terms of how many units of whatever you've budgeted for. And one of the things the stats does is tables, listings, and figure production. And that clear communication is so important when you've actually drafted the statistical analysis plan and the TLF shells, because there you actually get your first look at the true number of outputs the study is going to need. And there was a budget built before that point. And now you have to take those two and kind of put them together. And I know from firsthand experience, sponsors do not like if you've budgeted for 50 tables and then you draft the TLF shells and now you're showing 300. That's a very large delta in terms of cost. And that might be fine. It might truly be needed. You might need that many outputs to get across the messaging of that clinical trial. And the sponsor will be okay with it, possibly, if and only if you come to them ahead of time and say, hey, I'm going to begin drafting the TLF shells now, just so you know the budget says 50. Based on what we're seeing in the database, we think that's way off. We do expect. So you're kind of walking them towards, and this is exactly Audrey's point, you're walking them towards, with constant communication, you're walking them towards being kind of a softer blow in terms of the budget hit. That's a pitfall you can really make easily if you just say, hey, here's your shells, it's 300, and now your price is increased by tenfold. So good constant communication. Awesome.
The same goes for if there's issues, right? So if that, what you've mentioned earlier, Bobby, is having that proactive management of the study as a lead. If you, from a DM perspective, see that you have certain sites that are really struggling, they are falling behind with data entry, they are struggling with managing their queries, you have a vendor for which the transfers are delayed, don't wait until the deliverable to mention this to the sponsor. You have your monthly meetings with them. Highlight this. It might not be something that's within your control, but if you highlight this in advance and say, listen, we're going to have a problem here. We have an interim database lock in 6 months, and we have only 20% of the data at site 1, 2, 3. That enables the sponsor to also work with the clinical team. You can proactively mitigate risks that might impact, and that really just enables that collaboration that we've all been talking about to lead to successful outcomes of the study.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in on one thing before we move on, because we've got a lot to cover. And some of this is going to jump ahead to the project management conversation. But it's important to remember, if you're at a full service CRO, you're going to behave one way. If you're at a biometrics CRO, you're going to behave another way. Anytime you're seeing these issues or risks to your study, make sure you keep your project manager involved. There's sometimes biometrics is a black box to a global project manager, and they don't really know. However, they do really want to help. So if you really are having problems, you have to go to an issue, you have a scope problem, you have a data issue, keep your project manager in the loop. They are there to support you and help you navigate how the communication is going with the sponsor. And they want to help you, and you don't want to put them in the space of not knowing of an issue and getting a call from an angry sponsor, much like you wouldn't want them to know of an issue and not tell you, and then you get an angry call from a sponsor. So just to underscore communication, I think that's what's the biggest trait of a lead is good communication and delegation skills. And it's also the biggest pitfall risk is that you haven't communicated properly. Okay, moving on to the next question. How can biometrics leads, data managers, statistical programmers, statisticians work better together and collaborate better together to deliver better data?
So I'll kick us off. I think for me, the most important thing is having mutual respect and trust for the lead and the other function. Um, each one of the functional leads brings something to the table, and it's important to respect that and use the knowledge that they have with regards to their function and listen to something that the statistician might advise on when you do your database design, so that you can, in the end, have that collaborative approach to meeting the outcomes of your study. That as the project manager in me again, that if you start and include everyone when you plan. So from a DM perspective, that initial database design and that starts off is not really that critical. That at that point, the timelines for stats and statistical programming is way off, but involve them. Let them know what the planning is. We know we're going to go live. When would they want to maybe receive a first transfer to start looking at the data? So I think if you have that, all the stakeholders included from the start so that everyone understands what the dates are that you're working with, it just fosters that collaborative approach. And then again, the clear communication with all the functional groups. So if any thoughts on that?
I think communication is the most popular word today in this meeting. So what I think, if we look at the data management programming statistics, like classic model, it's like vendor customer chain, right? So what I think very important for the true collaboration and to achieve those synergies we can achieve working as one biometrics department is those feedback loops. So when we work on programming, we will inevitably find something which can be improved back in the database, and we need to report to the data management. And again, good communication comes into play, right? Same with statistics. So when, for example, reviewing the output, there may be some feedback back to the programming or even back to the data management. So this kind of more circular way of working would really help us to achieve the results better with lesser stress and lesser effort.
Yeah, completely agree. I have two here, and my first one is directly tied to what Evgeny just said, which is I think it ultimately comes down to education. Like being a statistician, I should know not everything about data management, but I should know a lot about what the data manager is doing, when they are going to be doing it, why are they going to be doing it. And the same is certainly true for statistical programming, probably more so because you work so much more closely with a statistical programmer. But still, if I am the lead statistician and I know what my data managers are working on in terms of getting a data reconciliation plan together, and I have to provide spec input on that data reconciliation specification, I should know what the data manager is doing and when they're doing. And if I know those things, then I can help when I'm needed, or I can loop them in on their reviews whenever they're needed. So the first part, and that goes back to Evgeny's circular customer-vendor relation chain, really knowing what your key stakeholders need from you and looping them in. And getting that education can be difficult. So the way I would suggest it is to just ask. Just reach out to your lead data manager and say, hey, I'm going to be doing the statistical analysis plan in the next couple of weeks. Is there anything you need to know, or is there anything I should know from you about this? And if they don't know what the statistical analysis plan is, you can educate them. So it's kind of a win-win situation there. The second piece then really is, and this is a tough one, but it really is teamwork. So clinical trials can be very stressful, especially when it comes time for database lock. And you're working under immense pressure, immense timelines are just so tight, and everybody's kind of scrambling. Hopefully you don't get into that situation. Hopefully you can be proactive and kind of prevent that last minute scramble, but it happens. And when that happens, for whatever reason in our minds, teamwork kind of breaks down and everybody kind of becomes like self-preserve mode. Like, I'm not gonna be the one who messes this up. And that is never what a good lead does. A good lead always stands up tall and says, this is what's going on. I don't care who's at fault. We need to work together to find this solution. And if that is the mentality of the team, I am a firm believer that anything is achievable. But if the team devolves into this like self-protection mode and you're just pointing the finger, you're wasting energy, you are not working as a team, it is very bad. So I think the best way you can collaborate is to remember you all have the same goal. Everybody is trying to achieve the exact same thing, which is a successful clinical trial. In terms of conducting the clinical trial, you have no control over if the drug works or not. What I mean when I say a successful clinical trial, I mean successfully implementing it so that you get good readouts of the data and you can present that to a regulatory authority. That's the goal. And if you keep that in mind, you can achieve it. The goal is not to preserve yourself or preserve your reputation. That will come naturally as a byproduct of achieving a successful clinical trial. So try not to step into that self-preservation mode and try and always have the end goal in mind and collaborate better.
Yeah, so well said, because I think everybody wants to solve the problem. Something's going to go wrong, right? I mean, who's right? Who's worked on a clinical trial? Everything's done perfectly. Nobody. So the issue is getting ahead, identifying that risk, that challenge early on, getting the stakeholders involved, transparency with your project manager, and solving the problem, not digging your heels in and just looking for someone to blame, because that will actually keep the problem from getting solved better. I'm going to move on to the next question, but I'm going to give you guys a sticky point on it. What challenges have you or your leads faced when fostering strong cross-functional team dynamics? And you cannot mention communication, because I think we have established the fact that that is always an issue, and you could just, every question you could just put communicate better. So what do you think are some other challenges you face that impact the team dynamic?
There is one thing which may seem to be contradictory to what Bobby said just now about collaborative work and the common goal, etc. But in fact, it is not. So one of the challenges I see is the kind of a lack of understanding of the responsibilities and the roles of the leads. So, and sometimes it leads to the lack of ownership. You know, I hear sometimes about the joint ownership, but honestly, I'm not a very big fan of this concept, because when the ownership is joint, we may end up with nobody having the ownership. So I think it's very important for every lead of every function to be very clear of what processes and what deliveries they are own and what they're accountable for. So a process may include different multiple roles with different multiple responsibilities, but there must be one owner, and this owner should be well aware of what they're accountable for.
That was brilliant. I could not agree more, right? Like it seems like you're shrinking your responsibilities down, and that can be seen as a negative thing, but it's not. The more clear cut your swim lane is, the less confusion there is of who's taking that ball, whose ball is that to grab. So Evgeny, I think that's a brilliant point. I think taking this question and expanding it beyond just the internal CRO team presents some other kind of issues or solutions that we might face in terms of cross-functional. And here I'm actually talking about the CRO working cross-functionally with the sponsor. That relationship can oftentimes be very confrontational. The sponsor sees the CRO as, we're paying you X amount of dollars, we expect perfection, and they have that right? These are not cheap things that they're asking us to do. However, if that relationship gets to that contention, that can be a real challenge. And now you're not working collaboratively, you're working very just kind of point and you do this, and it's not the best tandem movement towards that common goal of conducting a successful trial. So I would say that the challenge of maintaining a good, healthy relationship with the sponsor is a real challenge, but a good lead can act proactively and can ensure that that relationship maintains strong balance and does not devolve towards that kind of, you have to do this now or else type thing.
I think something that is also a challenge is conflicting priorities. So this sort of links in with what you guys said, right? So as leads, we are not necessarily all working on the same studies together. So you might have that your biostatistics lead also have deliverables on another study, or the data management lead has an interim lock and a final lock. But if you have that understanding of what the different roles are working with, it can really help to understand that this primary outcome that you're now working with might not be the only thing that this individual is focusing on. And then that lack of trust. So the moment that you start with blame shifting between roles and misaligning the communications with the expectations, that really just breaks down the collaboration within a team. So I think what you said, Evgeny, is so important, that we need to make, as leads, make the effort to understand what the other leads are doing, when they're doing it, what does it entail, so that you can know when they will need what they need, and trust that they will then be doing what they need to do. Understand that there might be some conflict in priorities. Not everyone has the same priorities that we focus on in our functional lead position.
Yeah, and it brings us back to Bobby's comment that we need to educate people, and every functional lead should be familiar with the problems and the processes of the other functional groups.
Okay, that is going to lead us really nicely into the next question, what is the lead's role in collaborating with the overall project management, and how does that relationship support better project outcomes? For whatever reason, I've seen a lot, and maybe we can say post 2020, a lot more contentiousness between a project manager of the entire clinical trial and biometrics. And I think that's just a function of the increased pressure around some clinical research. But what responsibilities do leads have in working with the project manager, and how can they make it better?
So as the project manager here, I want to highlight that the project manager, the success of the project manager is really contingent on the leads and the feedback that we get. So you rely as a project manager on the feedback, the status update, the risks that you get from each of the functional leads. As a data management lead, you have specific areas that you manage and that you update on. And the project manager needs to get that specific updates from you as a DM lead to enable them to provide the correct information to the sponsor and to mitigate the sponsor's expectations and risks. And the same goes for the other functional leads. So the project managers really, really rely on the feedback and the expertise of each of the functional leads that they work with. So as a functional lead, you need to make sure that you give the correct status updates, that you align your functions, goals, and objectives with the overall objective of the study, that you provide input on risks and mitigations that related to your function. And then you also have a responsibility to foster that team collaboration. So you need to make sure that the junior team members that you are working with knows what's going on, what's the overall goals, keep them motivated, and then provide that feedback to the project manager that sort of brings all of the functions together and gives that feedback to the sponsor.
Yeah, so from the full service CRO, it's a slightly different perspective, because very often we see that biometrics is on the bottom of the list of the project managers, and we like complaining about them, don't we? Yeah, we do it all the time. So, but I may say a banal thing, but we need to be a little bit sympathetic to the work they do, and we need to understand that it's really hard and very stressful work. They need to balance the interest of the different groups, different functional groups, and finance, and the sponsor, and the vendors. And they don't have enough time in the day, so they need like 36 hours a day, right, to do their job well. And we need to be patient, and we need to educate them, and we need to convey to them the challenges that we face, the needs we have, and what help we need from the project managers. And again, it brings us back pretty much to the question about the collaborative work. So same applies here when we work with a project manager.
Brilliant. No, completely agreed. And Andre, I'm very upset. I would have loved to have you as a project manager, and maybe I will one day, because I really appreciate your answer. And Evgeny, I completely agree. It comes back to the collaboration and having patience for the project managers, because there is not enough time in the day. I have always viewed the project manager as the true captain of the ship. They are the owner of the clinical trial, truly, at the end of the day. And vision is critical when you are steering a ship. If you do not see the iceberg, you will hit the iceberg. And so, to Audrey's point, the better your project manager's vision is of the entire landscape of the clinical trial, be it statistics, statistical programming, clinical operations, any of the functions, the better the clinical trial's chances are of being a success in terms of actually reaching completion on time, on budget. So, as the functional lead, it is absolutely your job to keep the project manager CC'd on your emails about critical items that are tied to milestones or budget or project deliverables. If you do not, it's not their fault they don't have vision. They were expecting and dependent upon you, the lead, to provide that material, and you failed to do so. So the first thing I always teach my lead statisticians is the project manager is your best friend. You might think it's the statistical programmers, and it is, don't get me wrong. You need them to produce the items that you need. But at the end of the day, it is the project manager who is ultimately tying everybody, including the statistical programmers, together. And so ensure that you are always looping them in on your key items, budget, timelines, deliverables. Everything should be good.
And to tie that all back to what we were talking about before, is biometrics is a team, and this team needs to focus on the goal. And the project manager and ClinOps and all the other teams are also part of your team, right? You are all working together. And I see that frequently people think of the PM on the opposite team or the sponsors team. And on CRO's side, your PM is actually on your team and is there to help you. But if they don't know you need help, then they can't help you. And if they don't know what help you need because they don't know what you're doing, then you can educate them, or you can ask your line manager to come in and help educate them. But I think that ultimately they almost all want to help you. They all want to help you. So it's a matter of keeping them in the loop. Okay, we're going to take a turn here and talk about what happens if there's poor performance by a lead or conflict with a lead, either internally or with the sponsor, and what happens when a line manager has to step in and address that. Both what do you do as a line manager to manage that situation, and if you have to replace the lead, what is that impact on the team and the project?
This is a heavy one. This is a very unfortunate situation to get to. So I'd like to first speak about what you can do to prevent this from happening as a line manager. So as a line manager, it is your responsibility to manage your team and ensure that your team has what they need in order to complete their job appropriately. And what I mean when I say that they have what they need, one of those elements is the knowledge of the process flows or the technical skills that they have to do if they're a statistician or a programmer or a data manager. So before we get to the point of pulling a lead and replacing them, the line manager should have been monitoring, should have been offering help, and should have been facilitating their team to raise their leads, to raise their hands and say, I'm stuck here. I don't know how to handle this. It is the lead, it is the line manager's ultimate responsibility to foster an environment where their team is comfortable coming to them. Those are the best line managers I've ever had. The people who foster the ability to say, I don't know, instead of cowering in fear because they don't know and not raising their hands. So I would never replace a lead unless I had really gone through and there were true performance issues that were not resolved after several tries of fixing the issue. In this hypothetical, we've gotten to the situation, we have to replace the lead. The first thing to do is to talk as an internal team and to ensure that everyone understands what's happening and who the new lead is going to be, and that all of the knowledge transfer is completed either through some type of checklist, so it's documented, or through some type of interactive review meeting where meeting minutes are taken so that that new lead comes in and isn't starting from zero. Because clinical trials are not snapshot things that are done in a day. Clinical trials are things that last sometimes several years. And so it's important that they get all of the decisions that have already been made, because the worst thing a sponsor is going to want to see or do is to rehash all of these items that have already been discussed, already been decided with the previous lead. So really, long-winded answer from me here, but avoid the scenario at all costs. If you cannot, then it is a slow and methodical transition where that new lead is not just dumped in and said, good luck. Instead, they're handheld by everybody, not just their line manager, but the lead data manager who has study knowledge, the lead statistical programmer who has study knowledge, and the other functions as well, to give that new lead the best chance of success.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Bobby, and just want to echo what you say, that to me, it should be considered to be like last resort to replacing the lead. And if there are performance issues, so maybe it's a better way for the line manager to work a little bit behind the scenes, helping the leads to improve their performance and get the things back up to speed. And sometimes it may be not performance issue, but communication issue. And I'm aware we're not allowed to use this word anymore. But it may be some kind of misunderstanding or the conflict between, let's say, the sponsor and the lead, or even with between the internal customer, like lead by statistician and lead programmer. And then it may seem the easiest way just to replace the lead, and it is, but it has a longer term consequences. One of them is the study transition, knowledge transition, which Bobby mentioned before. But also it has a negative impact on the lead, which is replaced, because they cannot learn from their mistakes and they may feel punished. And later on, when they're assigned on the new study, they will do the same mistakes. It doesn't have the line manager. The line manager has to step in, because they will have to sacrifice their other managerial tasks. And finally, it also has negative impact on the client, internal and external, because so if we replace the lead so easily, it's a sign that we don't have trust and confidence in our leads. And if we don't, why they should, right?
So I want to add, the ideal situation is that you have ample time when you transition leads. But we've all been in that situation where someone leaves and now you have 2 days, and how does that look and what does that create for the team? So we need to, as managers, understand that with your internal and external teams, any type of transition to any key team member does create some uncertainty. And that you need to manage. And I 110% agree with Bobby that the baseline managers that I've also had is someone that does support and creates that environment where you can learn and grow and learn from your mistakes. Because if you don't have that, like if then you said, now you just don't learn if you are just removed from a situation. But in a scenario where you, as maybe a junior lead, have to step up to take on the responsibilities of someone without having that full transition. I think there it's important for you, if you are in a line manager position, to make sure that that lead has the support that they need. Otherwise, you will be setting them up to fail. And then the rest of your team that has been working on that study for a longer time becomes really important, to rely on them to get that knowledge from the study, so that you don't have a situation where the sponsor has to rehash everything and get you up to speed. It's not the sponsor's responsibility. That's also from a CRO perspective to remember. So rather ask the questions to all of the internal team members and make sure that you know what's going on, so that you can present confidently when you do get to speak to the sponsor. And then if you have ample time to communicate this to your external stakeholders, communicating it earlier rather than later, making sure that they understand that there will be proper transition plans, knowledge handover, everything. If you don't have a lot of time and there's a lead transition due to unforeseen circumstances, also make sure that you keep your stakeholders involved. Don't go with the problem, come with a solution. Like we've said, like do tell them, listen, we've had this unforeseen circumstance, person A is leaving. Don't worry, we have all of this in place. Your study will not be impacted, and follow up on that to make sure that your lead can continue to deliver whatever the initial lead has been delivering.
Yeah, this is a great plug. I guess I have a true desire to manage an ETMF, but it's just, this is a great time to reiterate that this is why keeping your project documentation up to date is important. You probably don't care as a lead because you're doing a bunch of other things, and maybe you don't care about the person coming in after you, but think about if you have to take over a project as a lead and you're going to go looking for documentation, you're going to want to find it. So do yourself a favor and the people around you a favor and keep your documentation updated, and also see where your action decision log is and make sure that's updated and understand who owns that. Maybe if you don't even know what I'm talking about, it's probably a good idea to talk to your line manager or your project manager and say, hey, do we have an ADL? And see where that is and make sure that your key decisions are getting documented, because this will also really help in a transition. And again, you might not care if you think you're on your way out, but someday you're going to inherit a study and you're going to want good records. We're coming up towards the top of the hour, so I think this is going to be our last question, and I'm going to combine it with the following one. What can sponsors reasonably expect from their functional lead, and how can leads manage those expectations? And the second question to think about as you're answering this is, what do you see as frequently misunderstood about by sponsors about the lead's role?
This is a huge question. I'm happy to take a stab at it first. And stats is probably at the more extreme end of this, because stats can kind of be treated like all of biometrics, but I think especially stats, it can be treated as this black box where it's like, just give me my p-value, just give me my confidence intervals, and we're good. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. And honestly, that leads to real issues in the long run. So I think what sponsors should be able to reasonably expect from a lead statistician is, yes, the end results of the clinical trial, but also they should be able to expect updates in terms of what they're doing and why they are doing it, when they are doing it. So if you can, as a lead, respond to the who, what, where, when, why, and how of your processes, it just sets the study up and the sponsor up for so much more success. And that way the sponsor's not coming to you randomly with questions that you weren't expecting. You've already answered those questions. You've already put them forward to them. This is why we're drafting the SAP today versus 2 years from now. This is why we have to program the ATOM data sets this month in order to reach the interim analysis, which is, yes, 4 months away, but we need to program today so that way those programs are ready to run and they're validated by the time the interim analysis does come. So I think to put a label around anything specific that the sponsor can expect, it depends. It is determined by the study's needs. However, what the sponsor should be able to expect as a given across all studies, regardless of what that study is, a phase 1B small study or a global phase 3 study, they should be able to expect that their lead statistician will inform them of what they are doing, why they are doing it, and even to some degree how they are doing it. So that way the sponsor can then take those answers or details and give it to their key stakeholders, either their board or their investors or whoever they have to go to. And I know that this is really a disguised way of me saying the word communication, but ultimately that is, I think, a fair assumption of what the sponsor should expect to see. Audrey, I'd love for you to add to this and take us home.
So I think that what you described really goes for all functional leads, right? So the sponsor should reasonably expect the functional lead to manage the activities of their functional areas and provide feedback to everything related to that functional area, to be able to answer questions that they might have. But a good lead, like you said, is proactive in managing their functional area. And I don't think it's unreasonable for a sponsor to expect a lead to proactively manage their functional area and provide that regular status updates and feedbacks. Your sponsor usually tends to get worried and stressed if they don't know what's going on. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad, they just need to know. If they know, you can manage it. And I think that is a reasonable expectation. We've mentioned earlier the amount of money and things that gets invested in clinical trials. So there's sometimes a lot that's riding for a sponsor on the outcome of a trial. It makes them nervous and it's stressful for them as well. So it's not unreasonable for them to expect of you as a lead to just keep them up to date with what's going on in their study. And we need to also remember that from a GCP perspective, even though they've outsourced this work to you as a CRO, they still remain ultimately responsible for this clinical trial. So help them to feel comfortable in having the ultimate responsibility for managing this trial.
Yeah. And this approach not only helps the sponsor to have trust and confidence in us, it also helps us to manage sponsors' expectation. I mean, when we are proactively and transparently inform sponsor of what's going on and provide rationales for our decisions. So, like a typical example, sometimes sponsor ask questions. So why a tiny little thing? So, for example, tiny change in the data causes so much extra work for us. And then we need to be prepared to give the sponsor a rationale, to give them a breakdown that there is a process, like we need to run the programs, we need to validate and then communicate back with the data management, start review cycles, etc. And we need to explain to them that the process is there for reason, not for fun, because we need to ensure the quality and comply with regulatory requirements.
Yeah, great point, because I think that they really just want to know, because the person you're talking to, the sponsor, is going to have to talk to somebody else above them, and they want to be able to explain it. And so it's reasonable for them to expect that we are going to give them the information that they need. I think it's also reasonable for them to expect, if going back to every clinical trial has a problem, when you're having a problem on your trial, it's reasonable for them to expect more frequent communication. If they know you're actively working or trying to find a solution, I think it's reasonable for them to expect an update from you pretty frequently, whatever that frequency depends on, the timeline you're working on. If you're working on a month timeline, it's different than if you're working on a 3-day timeline where you'll want to be updating them multiple times a day. But they are reasonable to expect that, because otherwise they're just sitting there worried, and then they're calling people and making them worried, and that doesn't work well. All right, we have just a couple of minutes, really just a minute left. So 30 seconds, each of you, your final thought that you'd want to convey to a lead.
So it's a really stressful job, really, really hard and stressful job. So for the leads, I think it's very important not to forget that we are fortunate to be a part of this industry, because we're part of the industry which makes people healthier, which makes people's life better. It's also important to know that not everybody is lucky to be able to work with very intelligent people from different areas with different educational or cultural background. It's really a privilege, isn't it? So my message would be, never forget about this. Congratulate yourself for what you do and have fun.
So I definitely echo that. I think something for if you're a junior, or maybe now just in a clinical data specialist role, and you're sort of wondering, you look at the super lead that's running 5 studies and you think you'll never be able to do that. Remember that lead started where you were at. So, it is very stressful. It can be challenging. Sometimes the days are long and hard and tough, and you have tough conversations. But when you, as a DM lead, lock that database and you deliver the data and you look back on the journey that you and the team went through, it's just so rewarding. And I think irrespective of the functional lead, the area, we have this great privilege of being part of making people's lives better through research. And that is something that I think we should not forget. When the days are tough and the nights are long and you have a lot of things, and it's not, but it's rewarding and you're part of a bigger picture.
Brilliant. Echo that. And then just to end, before Amanda closes this out, Amanda, a big thank you from Audrey, from Evgeny, and from myself for putting this together. I think this was incredibly valuable. So thank you, Amanda, for setting this up. Really appreciate it.
I'm muted. Thank you all for participating, and thank you to everyone who attended today. I really appreciate Bobby, Audrey, and Evgeny bringing their time and experience to the conversation. There were some comments and questions we didn't get a chance to address, so we will add that to the follow-up information. And I invite you to follow me and Crossfield Consulting on LinkedIn. And if you have a topic that you would like us to discuss or you would like to be a guest, please just message me and let me know. Thank you to everybody who attended today.